Welcome back to the Piping Pastor, Theology Talks. Today we'll be continuing our discussion of eschatology by delving further into prophecy in the book of Revelation. Well, today I'm smoking my plum pudding bourbon barrel aged reserve in my Boswell pipe. I have to say, this tobacco is fast becoming one of my favorites. It is just delightful. Well, I don't normally record videos midweek. I just usually don't have the time for it, but I was like, you know what? It's pipe week, and I know everyone's been interested, or not everyone, but a lot of people have been interested in this series, so I'm like, you know what? I'll take some time to do this week. And of course, you know, it's never a bad reason to light up a pipe, right? So, and before we get into this, I do want to mention, I know Cliff already shared about Doc's recent health concerns, and you know, I'm of course lifting up my fellow preacher man in prayer, and you know, I hope you all are as well. It's a great thing about this community, this YTPC is the support that we offer each other in every way that we possibly can. So let's continue to keep him in our prayers. I was watching some of his old videos the other day, and the one where he shares a story about the calculator, visiting the place where the first calculator was. I'm assuming it was the Texas Instruments. And I think it's an excellent example of how far we've progressed technologically as a species, and yet we still struggle with the exact same things that they did thousands of years ago. If you think about the exponential increase in technology and where we've leapt, really, from the time when Doc was in 8th grade until now, these massive strides we've been able to make in art and industry, and yet we still struggle with pride and lust and avarice and anger and all these other different, you know, base sinful behaviors towards each other, towards the environment, towards God. None of that's changed. But we also have the benefit of the great overcomer, right? So don't want to be all pessimistic. Talking about prophecy, we should be more hopeful. So I left off last time mentioning that I would be speaking about in Revelation, where it mentions the beast, or the ontological source of evil. And in particular here we have in Revelations chapter 20, verse 2, it says, "He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years." So this ties to Isaiah chapter 24, verses 21 and 22, where it says, "In that day the Lord will punish the powers in heaven above and the kings on earth below. They will be herded together like prisoners, bound in dungeons. They will be shut up in prison and punished after many days." Now, in Revelation, we have a lot of titles there, right? You've got dragon, serpent, devil, Satan, right? But they're all referring to the same thing, which is the ontological source, or the base source of evil rulers in the earth. And we're going to get to the Antichrist here in a second. But that's what the struggle is actually against. In the verses in Isaiah, it's referring specifically to A&E kings like Sennacherib and so forth, who have done these horrible, atrocious things, leading the Assyrian army, you know, these war crimes and so forth. And these evil rulers are bound by God. So in an earthly sense, they're dealt justice, and they're bound away from God's people so they can no longer cause harm or damage. And that's the same sense that you get in Revelations chapter 20, verse 2. So kind of following along with the theme that we have here, everything is happening within the knowledge and the power of Christ. The destruction that we see is the removal of that art and industry that is blinding us from seeing God. And then we have the ontological source of the earthly powers who are kind of fostering that art and industry on us as another God. Because art and industry in and of themselves are not bad. The fact that, you know, we have calculators in our hands instead of, 12-foot long calculators now, that's a good thing, right? I mean, the advances we have in medicine, the advances we have in art and poetry, these are all good things until they start to take the place of God in our hearts. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in Revelation. And God is saying, even though you may have these evil earthly kings like Sennacherib and so forth doing these things, they're still just humans, right? And they're acting under the influence of these evil sources, and those are the evil sources. God's not just going to remove the kings and bind them. God is going to go to the root, the base, to the dragon, the serpent, and get to the core of the issue and deal with it in that manner. So that's kind of what that's talking about there. Now, the other thing when we deal with prophecy, especially in Revelation, is the Antichrist and Armageddon. I love this tobacco, but it is a bit moist. One of these days I'll remember, I have to dry this out for 15 minutes before I start smoking it. But get it out, can't wait to start. So, the Antichrist. So, this is from Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 to 4. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave its power and its throne and great authority, and on its heads it seemed to receive a death blow, but its fatal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" So, a lot of stuff there. Now, basically you've got two characters here, right? You've got the dragon and the beast. So the dragon essentially is Satan, and I'm speaking about Satan in a kind of a generic sense. Hasatan is actually a position in the heavenly courts. It's kind of like in the courts of God. He's like the prosecutor, right? Prosecuting attorney. The term is actually the accuser of the brethren, but it's in a legal sense, it's the people who test God's people. That's why you have Satan featured in the book of Job. But that's a talk for another time. So essentially, Satan in this generic sense is the ontological source of evil, right? It's the devil. And that's the dragon. The beast is the dragon's earthly king. The beast is the Antichrist, right? And so again, you have the imagery here of the horns. And the horns represent power and authority. They represent the kings. The diadems, of course, represent the royalty. And on the blasphemous names, we have the fact that these other minor earthly kings are subdued by this other king. And all these different animal shapes that represent different aspects of power. So there's great power of speech. There's great agility and mobility. So this king can be a lot of different places, go a lot of different ways, do a lot of different things, speak really well, and speak with authority and power, right? Not heavenly power, but earthly authority and power. Now, these verses here tie into the prophecy in Daniel. In Daniel has these visions, and then in chapter 7, these visions begin to become explained. So in 7:24, we have here, the 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the most holy, oppress his people, and try to change the set times and laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times half a time. Now, this verse in Daniel is set during the time of Belshazzar, but it's actually written much later in the time of the Seleucid ruler Antiochus Epiphanes. So the story is kind of set earlier, but it reflects stuff that's going on at the time it was written. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes is they say he's the Seleucid ruler who comes into Jerusalem and sets up a temple to Zeus inside the holy temple. So we have all that imagery of all the blasphemous names and acting against God's people and so on and so forth, because that's what Antiochus Epiphanes did. He basically desecrated the temple and stopped all the sacred worship of the Jews. This is what created the Maccabean revolt. It's recorded in 1st and 2nd Maccabees in the Catholic Bible. It's not in our Protestant Bible if you're Protestant, but it's actually the basis for the holiday of Hanukkah. So what we have, John of Patmos, John the Revelator here writing, and it's kind of hearkening back to this time of the Maccabean revolt that's recorded in Daniel, using the same imagery and same word choice. So basically you have them, you have the revelation there that this earthly king will come. It'll be kind of like the Seleucid ruler back in the day, but it's going to be much worse. It's going to be much bigger, much grander, much more power. There's going to be a great deal more blasphemy going on. But in the end, just like that last king, even though God's people were delivered into that last king's hand for times half a time, in the end, God wins. So it's not a prophecy of, hey, here are these aspects of the Antichrist. Look for this in any particular ruler so you can identify the end times. It's giving us this image of, in the end times, this kind of thing will happen, but don't worry about it because God's got the trump card. This has happened before on this minor league scale back here, during this time. When it comes to the major leagues and the big deal, it's going to be the same playbook, right? They're going to do the same kind of stuff. They're not going to invent anything. They're not going to do anything new. It's basically just going to be the Maccabean revolt kind of thing, but on a bigger scale. And at the end, God still wins either way. So that's what that's about. It doesn't mean that we have to start, combing through all the different world leaders and try to figure out who the beast is. Because again, we're not going to know when the date and the time is anyway, right? It says that pretty clearly in Scripture, but people have tried to do that, which is where a lot of that difficulty comes from. Okay, and the last thing, Armageddon. Revelation 16:16. And the demonic spirits assembled the kings at a place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So this is Megiddo. That's the name of the place, and Megiddo just kind of means range of mountains. So it's referred to 12 times in the Old Testament. I had to check my notes there to make sure. Yeah, it's 12 times in the Old Testament that it's referred to in and around the town or the area around that area. And it's never linked to any kind of prophecy in the Old Testament at all. And it's only mentioned here in Revelation once. That's the only time it's mentioned in the New Testament. But it talks about this gathering of kings and demons. So people have often said, well, that's where the last battle is, right? The enemy is gathering all the enemy's forces together for this last great battle. Well, there's no battle recorded there. That's all supposition, right? The only thing the verse says is that they gathered together in a place called Megiddo. And there's also reference to Gog and Magog. So a lot of people say, whoa, who's Gog and Magog? And is this, this country and this country? Gog is a person, and Magog is like a country or like an area, right? Gog was the ruler of a couple of tribes, Tubal and Mensch, and Gog was inspired, directed, drawn by God to attack Israel, so that God could then defend Israel against Gog, this really powerful and mighty ruler, right? To demonstrate God's glory. So when we see that, and we see the references in there, and people talk about those kinds of things, it's not so, again, we can pick out which countries are where and where they're all situated and who's related to Megiddo. And I heard something one time about there's a large oil reserve underneath the town of where Megiddo was historically. And, okay, sure, whatever, fine. But again, this isn't so we can kind of pick out a timeline, right? This is it's to let us know, okay, this battle happened at this time, and look what happened. Gog, the leader of Tubal and Mensch, rose up against Israel with this mighty army, and God laid him out, and God saved him. So in the end times as well, when these judgments come, it doesn't matter how many people you get together, right? You can get all the evil kings and all the evil spirits and put them all together in one town, fine. Doesn't make any difference. God is still going to win in the end. The point of these prophecies in Revelation is not so we can figure out when the last day is going to be. It's so we can realize the position we have in the universe, the position God has in the universe, and where God is leading us and how God takes care of us. It is meant to be a security blanket that no matter what's going on or no matter what seems to happen, God is there because God has been there historically. That's why we see all these revelations, all these verses in Revelation tie back, these revelations to John of Patmos, all related to these Old Testament scriptures, which just happen to be stories about when God showed up for the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. So there's a point to all these prophecies, but it's not so we can tell the future. So, well, that is it for this time. So we're done with prophecy. So then I think next in our next video, I think we're getting into, tribulation. Yay, the fun of tribulation. So we'll discuss that in the next video. So in the meantime, again, keep docking your prayers. And, I hope you have a lovely pipe week. Enjoy that bingo card that Cliff is getting filled out for all of us. And as always, happy reading.